If you turn off those stamping presses, Victor, you're violating company policy. Trevor sneered, leaning over my mahogany desk with his hands stuffed into his tailored suit pockets. You don't work here anymore. I picked up my leather briefcase, tapped the sealed envelope against his chest, and smiled. I don't work here, Trevor, but my patents do. Or rather, they did until 3 minutes ago. To understand how a 34-year-old vice president with a fresh executive degree managed to paralyze a $48 million manufacturing operation in under 5 minutes, you have to go back to 2001. 25 years ago, Precision Forging Corporation was little more than a drafty 40,000-square-foot warehouse in outer Ohio, bleeding cash and failing structural stress tests on basic aerospace forgings. The founder, Harold Vance, was 47 at the time, sweating through his flannel shirts as hydraulic fluid dripped from secondhand press lines. He couldn't afford to pay market-rate salaries for senior tooling engineers, nor could he afford the multi-million-dollar research and development costs to engineer custom multi-axis stamping dies for titanium alloys. I was 27 years old back then, fresh off 5 years of specialized metallurgical design work, holding 3 foundational utility concepts for hydromechanical press tooling. Harold sat me down in a cramped office that smelled of machine oil and stale coffee, offering me a choice. He could give me a tiny base salary and a slice of equity that might be worthless in 12 months. Or we could structure an unconventional partnership. I chose a hybrid agreement that every corporate lawyer on Wall Street would later call a stroke of genius. Though back then it was just basic self-preservation. I agreed to serve as chief tooling design engineer for a modest annual salary of $75,000, which eventually scaled to $120,000 over 2 decades. In exchange, I retained absolute personal ownership of all custom tooling designs, multi-axis die patents, and CNC programming architecture under my private holding entity, V-Design Engineering LLC. I granted Precision Forging Corporation an exclusive, non-transferable commercial license to use my patents for a nominal fee of $1 per year. However, Clause 14C of that licensing agreement was crystal clear. The $1 exclusive license remained valid only as long as I remained actively employed as Chief Tooling Design Engineer with full uninhibited design control over plant operations. If Precision Forging Corporation ever terminated my employment involuntarily without cause, the exclusive license instantly revoked. The company would then face a choice: immediately cease all manufacturing using my patented die configurations within 24 hours, or transition to a non-exclusive license requiring a 38% gross revenue royalty on every single forged component produced. 3 years after signing that initial contract, Precision Forging ran into another hurdle. The company needed to expand its main stamping floor to accommodate heavy multi-ton hydraulic presses, but local commercial lenders refused to finance factory construction for a mid-tier machine shop. Harold Vance came to me in tears, facing potential liquidation. I had just inherited a modest family trust and possessed substantial personal leverage. I stepped in, purchased the 12-acre industrial plot under my real estate firm, Miller Commercial Properties LLC, and constructed Facility Number 3, a specialized 120,000-square-foot manufacturing facility custom-built to support heavy vibration loads and high-pressure hydraulic lines. I leased Facility Number 3 back to Precision Forging on a rolling 30-day commercial lease agreement at a generous 15% below market rate. But just like the patent agreement, the lease included a mandatory operational compliance clause. If Precision Forging engaged in willful breach of contract, unauthorized intellectual property utilization, or illegal operations on the premises, Miller Commercial Properties retained the immediate right to issue a 24-hour notice of default, followed by a 30-day eviction proceeding. For 24 years, this arrangement was a golden engine of mutual prosperity. Harold Vance ran corporate sales and customer relationships, while I spent 60 hours a week on the plant floor, micromanaging tolerances down to 5/10,000ths of an inch. Under my supervision, Precision Forging secured prime defense subcontracts, culminating in an $18 million annual contract to supply high-stress hydraulic landing gear forgings for major defense aerospace primes like Lockheed and Raytheon. By early 2026, Precision Forging was generating $48 million in annual revenue with an operating margin of 22%. Then Harold turned 72. His doctor insisted. He stepped down from daily operations to manage a cardiac condition. Harold moved to chairman of the board, retaining 45% of voting shares. But he handed operational command of the company to his only son. Trevor Vance Trevor was 34 years old, held a freshly minted executive MBA from a top-tier university, and viewed manufacturing as nothing more than lines on a spreadsheet. He arrived on his first day, wearing a $3,000 tailored Navy suit, stepping onto the oil-stained factory floor in polished leather dress shoes. Within 48 hours of taking his seat as vice president of global operations, Trevor hired an outside management consulting firm to audit plant expenses. He didn't bother looking at raw titanium sourcing costs or heat treatment efficiency metrics. Instead, Trevor's eye caught a single line item under senior personnel payroll. Victor Miller, chief tooling design engineer, base salary $120,000 per year, plus $50,000 in annual performance bonuses. To an arrogant 34-year-old executive who had never held a micrometer or set up a 4-axis milling machine in his life, paying an engineer over 50 years old. A 6-figure salary looked like pure executive bloat. Trevor convinced himself that, since the automated CNC press lines were already running smoothly around the clock, my presence was an unnecessary historical relic. He decided that replacing me with a 24-year-old junior CAD operator earning $45,000 a year would instantly boost his quarterly earnings report and justify his executive bonus. On a cold Monday morning in late March, Trevor called me into the executive boardroom for what he described as a routine, operational alignment meeting. Sitting beside him was the company's young, newly appointed legal counsel, who looked barely old enough to have passed the bar exam. Trevor slid a thin manila folder across the polished mahogany table, a condescending smirk playing across his face as he adjusted his designer cuff links. "Victor, let's be completely transparent with each other." Trevor began, resting his elbows on the table and lacing his fingers together. "Precision Forging is entering a new era of agile corporate management. We're trimming the fat, streamlining operations, and eliminating redundant structural positions that no longer align with our lean fiscal model." I looked down at the paper inside the folder. It was a formal notice of involuntary termination, effective 8 o'clock that morning. The document offered me 2 weeks of severance pay in exchange for a full waiver of legal claims and a non-compete clause that would prohibit me from working in metallurgical design for 3 years. "Redundant structural position?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and even. I looked Trevor straight in the eye. "Trevor, I designed every single multi-axis stamping die currently running on press lines 1 through 4. I personally programmed the high-pressure hydromechanical sequence for the $18 million Lockheed landing gear forging contract. If those die assemblies aren't recalibrated every 72 hours by someone who understands micrograin thermal expansion, your reject rate will surge from 0.2% to 40% by Thursday afternoon." Trevor chuckled, a dismissive, patronizing sound that echoed in the quiet boardroom. He leaned back in his leather chair and shook his head with mock sympathy. "That's the classic ego of the old-school worker, Victor," Trevor said, tapping his expensive pen against the tabletop. "You think you're irreplaceable because you've been sitting in the same chair for 25 years. But this is 2026. Automation and cloud-based CAD software handle 90% of what you do. We've hired a bright young engineering graduate from State University who starts next week at $45,000 a year. He can push the green buttons on the CNC machines just as well as you can. Paying you $120,000 a year plus bonuses for holding a wrench is an insult to our shareholders." The young legal counsel sitting beside Trevor cleared his throat awkwardly, shuffling a stack of non-disclosure forms. "Mr. Miller, as part of your offboarding, we require you to hand over all master access keys to facility number 3, surrender your multi-factor authentication tokens for the plant control network, and transfer all proprietary tooling schematics to corporate servers immediately." I took a slow breath, feeling the cold weight of 25 years of dedication evaporating in a room full of arrogant ignorance. Trevor, before I sign anything or hand over a single key, did you review the foundational corporate archives from 2001? Did you examine the patent licensing registry under V Design Engineering or the commercial real estate title deeds on file for facility number 3? Trevor smirked, waving his hand dismissively in the air. I don't need to read 25-year-old yellowed paper, Victor. Whatever deal you made with my dad back when this place was a glorified barn is ancient history. Under modern corporate employment law, anything created inside this facility by an employee belongs to Precision Forging Corporation under the work-for-hire doctrine. You were on our payroll, which means your designs belong to us. Period. Now sign the severance agreement, hand over your keys, and clear out your personal locker before noon, or I'll have facility security escort you off the property. I looked at the severance agreement again. The 2 weeks of pay amounted to less than $5,000 before taxes. The non-compete clause was an absolute joke, but more than anything, Trevor's total failure to perform basic due diligence was staggering. He had assumed that because my salary was processed through the standard payroll system, everything I had ever built was corporate property. I won't be signing your severance release, Trevor, I said quietly, pushing the paper back across the table, and I certainly won't be taking your 2 weeks of pay. Suit yourself, Trevor snapped, his face hardening as his arrogance flared. You leave without severance, you leave with nothing. Hand over your key cards and get off my floor. I reached into my pocket, unclipped my Plantmaster keycard, and laid it flat on the mahogany surface. Beside it, I placed the physical hardware 2FA key used to access the plant's local network. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the door. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and looked at Trevor one last time. You should call your father, Trevor, I said softly. Ask him about Clause 14C. My father is retired, Victor, and I run this company now, Trevor replied, turning back to his laptop without looking up. Security will make sure you don't take any company blueprints on your way out. I walked down the quiet executive hallway, took the elevator down to the engineering floor, and stepped into my private office overlooking facility number 3. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the massive 3,000-ton hydraulic presses were roaring, stamping out precision defense components with rhythmic, ground-shaking thuds. The plant floor was a masterpiece of mechanical precision that I had spent half my life building. I spent 20 minutes packing my personal possessions into a heavy steel toolbox, my vintage brass micrometers, my handwritten metallurgical journals, and a framed photograph of Harold and me standing in front of the plant's first CNC milling machine in 2001. I didn't touch a single corporate computer or delete a single file. I didn't need to engage in petty sabotage. The law and the contracts were already doing the work for me. Before leaving the building, I walked over to the isolated rack server in the corner of my office, the dedicated hardware node that hosted the proprietary licensing validation server for V Design Engineering LLC. I reached down, pulled the master encryption key token from the USB slot, and slid it into my inner jacket pocket. Without that hardware token physically present in the node, the automated multi-axis die control software on press lines 1 through 4 would continue running for exactly 24 hours before triggering an automated license check requiring cryptographic re-authentication. At 11:15 Monday morning, I loaded my toolbox into the back of my pickup truck, started the engine, and drove out of the gate of Precision Forging Corporation for the last time as an employee. As soon as I pulled into my driveway 20 minutes later, I dialed attorney Victoria Palmer, a senior partner at Palmer & Associates, specializing in intellectual property rights and commercial real estate litigation. Victoria had represented my holding companies for over 15 years. Victorious, I said, leaning back against the leather driver's seat of my truck. Trevor Vance just fired me without cause to save $120,000 in salary. He refused to pay my contractual exit terms and threatened me with security. On the line, Victoria let out a long, quiet whistle. Did he have corporate legal conduct a due diligence audit on the patent portfolio or the commercial facility lease before delivering the notice? No, I replied. He told me 25-year-old contracts were ancient history and claimed work-for-hire doctrine. "Dear Lord," Victoria muttered, the sound of her fingers tapping rapidly on a mechanical keyboard audible over the speakerphone. He just triggered Clause 14C of the 2001 Patent Licensing Agreement and Section 8B of the Facility 3 commercial lease simultaneously. "Victor, do you realize what he just did?" "I know exactly what he did," I said calmly. "Draft the formal notices. By 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon, Victoria Palmer had executed a two-pronged legal offensive that was mathematically designed to dismantle Precision Forging Corporation's operational capacity within 24 hours. The first document was a formal notice of patent license revocation and immediate cease and desist directive under Title 35 of the United States Code, Section 271, hand-delivered by a certified process server directly to Trevor Vance's executive suite. The document outlined the exact legal realities Trevor had dismissed 4 hours earlier. The letter specified that under Clause 14C of the foundational 2001 licensing agreement, the involuntary termination of Victor Miller without cause instantly terminated Precision Forging Corporation's exclusive $1 per year commercial license for U.S. Patent Number 8492, 103. The multi-axis hydromechanical stamping die assembly that powered every single hydraulic press on the facility floor. Effective at 11:15 Tuesday morning, exactly 24 hours from the moment of my firing, Precision Forging was strictly prohibited from utilizing, operating, or manufacturing components using any of the 9 patented die configurations registered to V-Design Engineering LLC. The directive made it abundantly clear that any continued operation of press lines 1 through 4 beyond 11:15 Tuesday morning would constitute bad faith, willful patent infringement under 35 U.S.C. Section 284. Under federal law, willful infringement exposed Precision Forging to treble damages, triple the actual financial losses incurred by the patent holder, alongside an immediate federal preliminary injunction to seal the plant doors. Furthermore, if Precision Forging wished to avoid an immediate shutdown and sought a temporary non-exclusive operating license, Clause 14C stipulated an emergency rate, 38% of gross contract revenue on all forged components produced, payable weekly in advance, plus a liquidated damage penalty of $25,000 for every single calendar day of unauthorized patent utilization. The second document was even more devastating. It was a formal notice of material lease default and 30-day eviction notice served on behalf of Miller Commercial Properties, LLC, regarding Facility Number 3. Under Section 8B of the Commercial Lease Agreement signed in 2004, the tenant, Precision Forging Corporation, was required to maintain full legal compliance and authorized operational status for all manufacturing activities conducted on the property. By operating unlicensed, infringing patent machinery on the premises. After 11:15 Tuesday morning, Precision Forging was in direct material default of its commercial lease. The notice gave Precision Forging 24 hours to cure the default, failing which Miller Commercial Properties LLC exercised its contractual right to terminate the lease and require Precision Forging to fully clear its machinery, heavy hydraulic presses, and inventory off the 12-acre property by midnight on April 30th. When the process server handed the heavy legal packet to Trevor Vance at 2:15 Monday afternoon, Trevor reportedly laughed out loud. He threw the papers onto his desk without reading past the first page, telling his administrative assistant that old Miller is trying to scare me with legal mumbo-jumbo. He instructed corporate counsel to file the papers in a bottom drawer and went home early to celebrate his first cost-cutting victory. While Trevor was sipping scotch at a country club, the operational clock was ticking inside Facility Number 3. What Trevor and his green 24-year-old replacement engineer failed to comprehend was that modern high-tonnage hydraulic forging presses aren't just big pieces of metal. They are complex electro-hydraulic systems operating under ultra-precise digital control algorithms. Titanium forging requires multi-axis die movement accurate to within microns, managed by specialized embedded firmware designed to prevent catastrophic metal fatigue and thermal cracking. Every 24 hours, the proprietary firmware controlling press lines 1 through 4, executed an automated cryptographic handshake with the local licensing server I had built back in 2012. The system was designed to ensure that unauthorized third parties couldn't copy our proprietary CNC program files and run them on foreign presses. At 11:14 on Tuesday morning, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping a fresh cup of black coffee while monitoring the remote status dashboard of V-Design Engineering LLC on my personal laptop. At 11:15 sharp, the automated 24-hour cycle timer expired. Inside facility number 3, press line 1. The massive 3,000-ton hydraulic monster, currently stamping out high-stress landing gear components for Lockheed, was in the middle of a high-pressure compression cycle. Suddenly, the CNC controller on the master operator panel flashed yellow, followed by a bright, pulsing red alert light across the entire shop floor. Critical alerts. 90 missing. Off 99F. Hardware encryption key not detect. System executing safe, hydraulic shone. With a deafening hiss of depressurizing hydraulic fluid, the 3,000-ton press ram locked in its upper mechanical stop position. One by one, press line 2, press line 3, and press line 4 followed suit. Within 90 seconds, all 4 primary production lines ground to a complete, dead halt. Red strobe lights flashed against the corrugated steel ceiling of the factory floor, and loud warning horns echoed across the facility. The floor supervisor ran into the central control room, where Trevor's new 24-year-old junior engineer was staring at the blinking red monitors in absolute terror. What happened to line 1 and line 3? The floor supervisor screamed over the alarms. We've got $60,000 worth of heated aerospace titanium billets sitting in the preheat furnaces. If they cool down below 1,600 degrees without being forged, they're complete scrap. I don't know. The young engineer stammered, his fingers trembling as he typed random commands into the terminal console. The system says the hardware token is missing. It's requesting a 4096-bit RSA decryption key to restart the hydraulic pumps. Where is the key? The supervisor yelled. It was on a physical USB hardware token in Mr. Miller's office server. The engineer whimpered. He took it with him when he left yesterday. The floor supervisor slammed his hard hat onto the floor. Then call Trevor Vance right now, because if Lockheed doesn't get their first shipment of hydraulic assemblies by Thursday afternoon, Precision Forging incurs a liquidated damage penalty of $125,000 every single day. 10 minutes later, Trevor Vance roared into the executive parking lot in his sports car, sprinting through the plant doors with his tie flying over his shoulder. He barged into my former office, shoved the junior engineer out of the way, and stared at the locked server rack in the corner. "Override it!" Trevor screamed, his face flushing crimson as the red strobe lights reflected in his eyes. "Bypass the software. I don't care what you have to do. Crack the code. Rewire the control box. Green-light those presses right now." The junior engineer shook his head, looking like he was about to vomit. "Mr. Vance, it's military-grade hardware encryption. If we try to physically bypass the control board, the safety interlocks will lock the hydraulic valves permanently. Only Victor Miller has the master decryption key." Trevor grabbed his cell phone with trembling hands, pulled up my contact number, and dialed. I watched my phone ring on the kitchen counter. I let it ring 4 times before answering with a smooth, unhurried voice. "Victor Miller, Victor!" Trevor bellowed into the receiver, his voice cracking with hysteria. "What the hell did you do to the press lines? Every single machine on the floor just locked up. You sabotaged company property on your way out." I took a slow sip of coffee. "I didn't sabotage anything, Trevor. Your 24-hour patent license expired at 11:15 this morning. As of 3 minutes ago, Precision Forging Corporation is operating unlicensed intellectual property. If you attempt to force those machines open, you are engaging in intentional patent infringement under federal law." "You can't do this," Trevor shrieked. "I'm the vice president of this company. I order you to bring that hardware key back to the plant right now." "Trevor," I said softly, "you fired me yesterday morning. You told me my 25 years of experience were redundant overhead. I don't work for you, and I certainly don't take orders from you. Have your corporate lawyer check his inbox. You have 24 hours to vacate my building. Before he could respond, I hung up the phone. By Tuesday afternoon, absolute panic had gripped the executive floor of Precision Forging Corporation. $60,000 worth of specialized titanium billets, heated to 1600 degrees Fahrenheit in the preheat induction furnaces, had cooled down inside locked chambers, oxidizing into completely ruined blocks of scrap metal. The plant floor was dead silent, save for the blaring warning horns that management didn't even know how to reset. At 2 o'clock Tuesday afternoon, the Vice President of Defense Procurement from Lockheed Martin called Trevor Vance's office directly. "Trevor," the procurement executive said, his voice cold and sharp as surgical steel. "Our satellite logistics tracking shows 0 freight departures from your loading docks today. Your quarterly delivery of 84 hydraulic landing gear forgings for the F-35 program is due at our Fort Worth assembly plant by Thursday at 5 o'clock. "Are those units on the trucks?" Trevor stammered, wiping cold sweat from his forehead with his silk tie. We're experiencing a minor technical recalibration on our primary press line, sir. A brief software glitch. We expect to resume full production by tomorrow morning. Listen to me very carefully, Trevor," the Lockheed executive interrupted. "That $18 million defense subcontract contains a strict liquidated damages clause. If those forgings are not delivered by Thursday at 5 o'clock, Precision Forging will be assessed a penalty of $125,000 for every 24 hours of delay. If delivery is delayed past 72 hours, we will declare a material breach of contract, terminate the subcontract for default, and initiate federal debarment proceedings against your firm. Fix your software glitch immediately." Trevor slammed down the phone, his hands shaking violently. He sprinted down the hall to the corporate legal office, shoving open the door and screaming at his senior staff attorney. "Why haven't you issued an emergency court injunction against Victor Miller yet?" Trevor yelled. "He's sabotaging our plant. He stole the software key." The senior corporate attorney, a veteran lawyer named Marcus Vance, no relation to Harold or Trevor, slowly looked up from a thick binder of documents. His face was pale, and he looked like he hadn't slept in 30 hours. "Trevor, shut up and sit down," Marcus said flatly. "Don't you talk to me like that. I'm the vice president," Trevor roared. "You're an idiot, Trevor," Marcus replied coldly, sliding the 2001 patent licensing agreement and the 2004 commercial lease deed across the desk. "I just spent the last 3 hours on the phone with intellectual property counsel and a commercial real estate judge. Victor Miller's paperwork is flawless. It's ironclad." Trevor blinked, his arrogant composure cracking for the first time. "What do you mean, ironclad? He was an employee. Everything he built belongs to the company. He was not an employee under standard work-for-hire terms for his tooling designs," Marcus shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. 25 years ago, your father couldn't afford R&D costs, so he signed a personal patent licensing agreement with Victor's LLC. Victor owns patent number 8,492,103 personally. The exclusive $1 license was tied directly to his active employment as chief tooling engineer. When you fired him on Monday to save $120,000 in salary, you automatically revoked our license to use every single stamping die and facility. Marcus leaned forward, pointing a trembling finger at Trevor's chest. "Every minute those presses ran after 11:15 this morning, we were committing willful patent infringement under federal law. Victor's lawyer has already filed for treble damages. If this goes to federal court, we are liable for 3 times our annual gross revenue on that Lockheed line, over $54 million in statutory damages. And on top of that, Victor owns the physical land and building of Facility 3 through his real estate LLC. He just served us a 30-day eviction notice. We have to tear down 4 3,000-ton hydraulic presses and clear out of his building by April 30th. Trevor collapsed into an office chair, the blood completely draining from his face. "My God," he whispered. "No, not my God," Marcus spat. "Your father." At 5 o'clock Wednesday morning, an emergency conference call was placed to Florida, waking 72-year-old Harold Vance at his retirement home. When the retired founder heard that his son had fired Victor Miller, paralyzed the plant, exposed the company to $54 million in patent liabilities, and triggered an eviction from Facility 3, Harold nearly suffered another cardiac event. Harold caught the first commercial flight back to Ohio, arriving at Precision Forging Corporation by 11 o'clock Wednesday morning. Witnesses on the executive floor reported hearing Harold's voice roaring through the closed mahogany doors of Trevor's office for 45 solid minutes. The old founder dismantled his son with surgical fury, berating Trevor's Ivy League arrogance, his utter failure to audit corporate records, and his complete disrespect for the engineer, who had built the company's technical foundation from scratch. At 2 o'clock Wednesday afternoon, an emergency negotiation meeting was convened at the high-rise law offices of Palmer and Associates in downtown Cleveland. Sitting on one side of the massive granite conference table were Victor Miller and attorney Victoria Palmer. Victor sat calmly, wearing a dark gray suit, a warm cup of coffee in front of him, and a thick leather folder containing his original title deeds and patent certificates. Sitting across from us was 72-year-old Harold Vance, looking exhausted and deeply aged, flanked by corporate attorney Marcus Vance. Sitting at the far end of the table, staring down at his lap in absolute silence and shame, was 34-year-old Trevor Vance. "Victor," Harold began, his voice raspy and shaking with emotion as he looked across at his former partner. "I don't even know how to apologize for the incompetence and sheer disrespect you were subjected to on Monday morning. I raised a son with a high-priced degree, who thought he could run a complex manufacturing plant off a spreadsheet without understanding the blood, sweat, and legal rights that built it." I looked at my old friend Harold, feeling a momentary pang of sympathy for the founder, but my eyes quickly shifted to Trevor. "Harold," I said evenly, "I respect you, and I respect what we built together over 25 years. But your son didn't just fire me. He insulted my life's work, called me redundant overhead, threatened me with security, and tried to strip away my intellectual property rights. The era of $1 exclusive licenses and 15% below market rent is officially over." Victoria Palmer opened her briefcase and slid a 4-page formal settlement agreement across the granite table, directly toward Marcus Vance and Harold. "Here are Mr. Miller's non-negotiable terms for the resolution of patent infringement liabilities, licensing reinstatement, and facility lease continuation," Victoria stated in a clear, authoritative tone. Trevor looked up slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "What are the terms?" Victoria smiled, looking at Trevor with cold professional disdain. "Read line 1, Mr. Vance." Marcus Vance picked up the settlement document, scanning down the clear, unyielding paragraphs. As he read each clause aloud to the room, Trevor's eyes grew wider and wider with horror. "Term 1, Marcus read, his voice heavy with resignation. Immediate and permanent resignation of Trevor Vance from his position as Vice President of Global Operations, alongside his complete removal from the Board of Directors and any operational authority within Precision Forging Corporation." Trevor jumped out of his chair, banging his hands on the table. "What? Father, you can't agree to this. He's forcing you to fire your own son." Harold Vance looked at Trevor with eyes full of sorrow and cold steel. "You fired Victor on Monday morning to save $120,000, Trevor. In 72 hours, you destroyed our reputation with Lockheed, shut down our plant, and exposed this family to $54 million in federal law liabilities. Sit down and shut your mouth." Trevor sank back into his chair, trembling as Marcus continued reading. "Term 2, Marcus read. Precision Forging Corporation shall immediately pay a one-time retroactive licensing fee, an operational settlement penalty of $4,800,000 to V-Design Engineering LLC to cure all past patent utilization defaults and release all claims of willful infringement. Term 3, Marcus continued. Victor Miller shall not return as an employee. Instead, V-Design Engineering LLC shall be retained as the exclusive chief technical consultant for Precision Forging Corporation under a 5-year binding contract with an annual retainer of $350,000. In addition, V-Design Engineering LLC shall receive a non-negotiable 5% gross revenue royalty on every defense and commercial forging produced using U.S. Patent Number 8,492,103, payable monthly, Term 4. Marcus read, wiping sweat from his forehead. The commercial lease for facility number 3 between Miller Commercial Properties LLC and Precision Forging Corporation shall be restructured into a 10-year triple net commercial lease at full prevailing market value plus a 20% security premium, resulting in a monthly rental fee of $48,000. Term 5, Marcus concluded. Precision Forging Corporation shall reimburse Palmer and Associates $145,000 for all incurred legal and auditing fees within 48 hours. Silence hung over the high-rise conference room like heavy industrial smoke. The total financial package, between the retroactive settlement, the annual consulting retainer, the 5% gross royalty, the restructured building lease, and legal fees, amounted to over $8 million in immediate and recurring value for my holding companies. Trevor looked at his father, his voice cracking in desperately. Father, this is extortion. We can't pay $8 million. It will wipe out our cash reserves for the whole fiscal year. Harold looked at his son, then looked across the table at me. We have $48 million in annual revenue, Trevor, Harold said softly. If we don't sign this agreement today, Lockheed cancels our $18 million defense contract tomorrow. Victor evicts us from facility 3 and 30 days, and federal patent courts bankrupt us by summer. We pay it because Victor earned it and because you were stupid enough to think you could steal from the man who built this company. Harold reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out his vintage fountain pen, and signed his name firmly on the signature line of all 4 copies of the settlement agreement. He then turned to Trevor, extending his hand across the table. Give me your corporate access badge and your office keys, Trevor. Security will pack your personal desk items and mail them to your house tomorrow morning. You are done at Precision Forging. Trevor stared at his father in utter disbelief, his face pale and tears welling in his eyes. With shaking hands, he unclipped his leather badge holder, laid his office keys on the granite table, stood up, and stumbled out of the conference room without saying another word. As soon as the ink on the documents was dry, Harold looked at me with a tired, relieved smile. Victor, will you save my plant? I reached into my inner jacket pocket, pulled out the sleek brass hardware token containing the master decryption key, and laid it on the granite table in front of Harold. Plug this into the master server node in my old office, Harold, I said calmly. The automated press lines will re-authenticate within 10 seconds. Your night shift can start forging titanium by 6 o'clock tonight. At 5:30 Wednesday afternoon, Harold personally walked the hardware token onto the floor of facility number 3. Within minutes, the warning horns ceased, the red strobe lights turned off, and the massive 3,000-ton hydraulic rams roared back to life, with rhythmic, ground-shaking precision. Precision Forging Corporation worked through the night, completed the 84 hydraulic landing gear forgings, and loaded them onto Lockheed Defense transport trucks at 4 o'clock Thursday afternoon. Delivering the order to Fort Worth, with 1 hour to spare before the liquidated damages deadline expired, in the months that followed, Precision Forging Corporation stabilized its operations. Under my 5-year technical consulting agreement, I visit facility number 3 twice a month for routine metallurgical audits, spending no more than 5 hours a week on plant business. My holding companies now generate over $1,200,000 annually in passive consulting retainers, patent royalties, and commercial property rent from Precision Forging, more than 10 times my original engineering salary. As for Trevor Vance, his father stripped him of his corporate executive titles. Last I heard, Trevor was working an entry-level compliance auditing desk at a small regional freight warehouse in southern Indiana, earning $42,000 a year while paying off his executive MBA student loans. Sometimes, when young executives climb into positions of power they didn't earn, they mistake quiet loyalty and deep technical mastery for weakness. They look at a senior engineer holding a wrench and see an unnecessary expense on a balance sheet, But in the world of heavy industrial manufacturing, real power doesn't live in fancy executive boardrooms or tailored suits. It lives in the patents, the land deeds, and the ironclad contracts forged by the hands of the people who actually know how to build things.